Welcome to another podcast with two fun guys talking food plots, where we share ideas and methods to growing more attractive food plots with less work. My name is VanderVeen of Strategic Habitat. My co-host is Brad Harper of Harper Growing Solutions. In this episode, Brad and I talk about what kind of last-minute herbicide and fertilizer spray applications you can still make, and a different option for applying nitrogen to your struggling brassica plants that won't burn them like urea can, even without rain. And Brad has a great way to plant Miscanthus grass rhizomes with a high rate of success to create tall perennial food plot screens, and he explains what he's been doing with grapevines besides hanging them above scrapes. So with that said, let's go right into my conversation with Brad. Hey Brad, how you doing?
Hey, doing good. How are you?
Real good. So, man, is it cool over by you?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's so nice.
These are the mornings that you think about in the middle of July when it's 90 and humid, right?
Oh, I know it. And that's what I think everyone waits for a morning like this to finally kind of get them in the mood a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the only downside to, great working weather outside like this is it's too late to go out and work in the woods.
I know it. You win some, you lose some.
Yeah. Yeah. Not many things left on the to-do list that you can do and get away with, but boy, the deer have just been blowing up the trail cameras here just in the last 24 hours. We've had several, new bucks show up on camera that we haven't seen in 3 months, and it's pretty exciting. So there's a couple of farms where there's not much food, and a lot of sorghum being grown in neighboring farms, and not a lot of corn and soybeans. And now that our food plots are really rocking, wow, we're getting a lot of bigger deer numbers. So pretty exciting.
For sure.
Yep. Last podcast we had, one of the things that we were going to talk about, and we just flat out forgot, was, talking about herbicide at this time of year, trying to prepare food plots and whatnot for next year, trying to eliminate that weed competition. And, I know there was some things about that you wanted to cover. So, what was that that you wanted to pass along to guys that we forgot to talk about with herbicide?
Yeah, I was getting quite a few questions on, the how late to do any sort of feeding as far as fertilizer goes. And we briefly touched on that. And I think we can get in depth a little bit more on that quick. But then, yeah, if we can cover some herbicides, just for all the questions that I've seen on Facebook and all the questions I've been getting, I think it'd be a good time to kind of cover that, especially because we kind of forgot it that would have been the premium time to talk about that. But better late than never, I guess. So as far as the fertilizer goes, we had touched on that a little bit about how most of those crops are growing until that first frost. And according to the weather, we still got quite a bit of time before we see that. So it's still not too late, especially for guys that are seeing deficiencies in any of their crops, to get out there and get something on. But being the fact that we are late like this, depending on what crop or what deficiencies you're seeing, a lot of the times we'll just go out with more of a phosphorus and potassium fertilizer and not really try to push them too much with nitrogen at this point. Just because there's not that much time left for, a bunch more growth. If we can just kind of fix some deficiencies and make sure those plants are healthy and try to pull some more nutrients within that forage, that's a good time for it. And we still have time left in the growing season for that.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of guys, when they start seeing some of their brassica leaves start to turn, like a light pale green or even kind of a yellow or purple, right away had this same assumption for many years. And that was, oh man, I'm low on nitrogen. But that's really not necessarily the case, is it?
No. And that's what, depending on, where that yellow shows up or how it shows up in brassicas, it could be a moisture issue, whether it be too much or not enough. They start to kind of pale out or turn yellowish. And then potassium as well is yellow around the edges of the leaves. And at first glance, that could seem like you're low on nitrogen in one way or the other. And that's something that it's definitely worth kind of doing some research in, or maybe asking some questions, because if it's not nitrogen and you're just going to go out with urea, you're not really going to be fixing that problem.
No, that's true. a landowner in the thumb of Michigan, and he texted me a while back to say that he had put some urea down 4600, and it ended up burning a bunch of his brassicas in his food plot. I guess, the damage was, it wasn't a total loss, but it was pretty significant. He was really, really bummed out. Wanted to know if there was anything that I, recommended. I says, well, maybe go over to your property and wash your truck. I mean, we need a lot of rain to kind of, wash that stuff through. But yeah, really, when you're using your foliar spray, you really don't have that issue, do you?
No, definitely not. Not only because it's not sodium based or anything, but it's also low in nitrogen. So you don't end up with any burn whatsoever. And that's something that I was talking with a few guys that they were wanting to do a nitrogen application, and the weather obviously not cooperating. Well, that's something, if you wanted to do nitrogen, you can always look at AMS, because that's not going to volatilize like urea will.
AMS being ammonium sulfate.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily just a granular. I mean, it comes in liquid form as well.
Exactly. So, you can do either form, but if guys wanted just a quick fix to run and grab some granular, that's not going to volatilize or burn anything like urea will. So therefore, if the weatherman happens to get something wrong, you're not necessarily going to totally burn up that whole crop. Another one would be a liquid nitrogen, any sort of liquid nitrogen form that you could take a look at. One of those is wherever you're getting that, make sure you talk to them and ask them about that, because some of those foliar nitrogen products will burn, and some of them you might not be able to spray during the day when it's hot out, but that's just one of those things to make sure you ask enough questions. But a lot of those forms are, that's a good application to make if you're looking for nitrogen.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of mixture rate are you normally recommending with your stuff?
With my stuff as a foliar app, we'll look at Plot Doctor foliar anywhere from a quart all the way up to a gallon, kind of depending on the situation. But a lot of guys, they'll go out with a quart per acre foliar, and a lot of the times they'll add my liquid nitrogen at either a quart or a half a gallon per acre, and put both of those together. And that's something that with that stuff, we don't have to worry about burning or have to worry about if it rains right away or not. So that's a good application, especially with kind of the fall we've been having so far, that depending on where your property's at or anything, if you can't get there right away, you don't have to worry and hope that, you're not sitting there wanting to wash your truck last minute either.
Right. You're right. So, I've got a couple of food plots I've been working on that they got a horse nettle problem in there. And, really not much you can do at this point as far as herbicide goes. Is that correct?
A couple things, and that's where, what plots are those in? What crops are in there?
Well, it's a, to be honest with you, it's the one that I've been doing the Battle of the Blends comparison on.
Okay.
So, it's got everything in there. I mean, brassicas, grains, you name it.
Okay. So now talking about fall herbicides, the day we're talking about it here, we're definitely getting kind of late depending on where you're at, but fall herbicides are actually a really good time to kind of take care of those harder to kill weeds, because they're working on starting on pulling everything back down to the roots. All those perennial weeds are. So a lot of the times they might be kind of hard to kill, in June, July, and August, but once you start going dormant on the perennials, they'll be pulling all that really back down to their root systems and storing all that stuff for winter. And that's when we can actually make a better impact with our herbicides on those harder to kill perennial weeds. And that's something like horse nettle is not a bad one to do right now. Just to have basically pull that herbicide down, get as much as possible in the root system, and you're going to be a little more effective this time of year than you would any other time. Another one is like in our clover chicory plots. If we have a lot of harder to kill grasses, maybe in June or July, you might have a hard time killing with clethodim. And doing that now kind of later in the fall is actually a really great time, as that does start to take all them nutrients back down to the roots, and that'll just pull that herbicide down with it.
So what are you recommending you spray on, weeds and grasses? Well, clethodim on the grasses. What about like broadleafs? Are you going with something like IMOX?
I use Butarac, just because I got a lot of acres, so I'm buying a 2.5 gallon jug and doing Butarac. That way too, if I wanted to separate the two, I can. But in all my clover chicory plots, if I just use Butarac with a non-ionic surfactant, right now would be a really good time to hit those kind of harder to kill weeds. The only downside to that is, it seems like after you spray that, you have a little bit of downtime as far as deer hitting that. At least in my experience on my plots, it seems like they kind of stay out of there for a little while. And that's the only downside to doing a herbicide app this time of year.
Right. Well, if you got a high deer population and you want, to preserve your food plots till later, maybe that's a good repellent to put on there then.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, that's not going to hurt one bit. And I think that from everybody I've talked to, it kind of boils down to how bad is the weed situation right now to decide if we want to spray that right now or not, and or what types of weeds are in there. Like I was saying, especially with like quackgrass or Johnson grass, a lot of those harder to kill grasses that clethodim normally doesn't do a great job on is actually a perfect time to do that now, just to try to get at least something pulled down into the roots a little more than normal.
Yeah. So back to the horse nettle. Now, the horse nettle, for guys that don't know, that's the weed that's got the little yellow berries on it, and the stems are full of thorns. I mean, you absolutely can't pull those without leather gloves on. But so if you have horse nettle in a food plot, is there anything selective that you can spray on that, or are you just talking like a virgin field that you're going to turn into a food plot the following year?
Both. If I had a bad horse nettle problem, that's something that it seems no matter what, you're always going to kind of deal with that when we're trying to, especially in a perennial plot. There's nothing you can really spray that's going to completely take care of it. But, now is a good time that if you were to maybe go spot spray some Roundup, because if we can try to get that at least, really damaged before that goes to seed, we can have a little bit of impact on that. So it's not completely reseeding itself. And that's where a lot of guys will use Rely on those or Liberty just to kind of switch everything up. But that's something I would just go spot spray with whatever you had just to try to get anything, because that's not a very nice one to have in any of your food plots that can take over. And obviously the deer aren't eating that one bit.
Right. Yeah. And really trying to pull those horse nettle weeds is really not even an option because they have such a deep, long taproot. It's kind of like a dandelion, you're never going to pull that taproot out of the ground.
No, those are just nasty ones, and kind of like thistle, to where thistle's not a very nice one to have either. And it's kind of harder to kill like that. So, like I said, it really depends on the whole situation, but that's something to think about, that especially with your perennial weeds, that's a good time to go in and at least put a little more hurting on them now than what you would earlier in the spring.
Yeah. So, I was talking to John Comp and yesterday, and he was saying where he just got a big shipment of some switchgrass seed in, and, he's selling it 50-pound bags, 5-pound, 10-pound bags. But even to a lot of guys around here, because, they're starting to plant some switchgrass seed even right now, where, most guys are doing it in the spring. But if guys wanted to plant switchgrass right now and get that ball rolling, are you recommending they plant anything with it, Brad, like a nurse crop?
We had played with that a little bit. For a lot of the guys that I had talked to, given their situation, I actually recommended that they try to get one more Roundup spray in right now and frost seed it rather than plant right now. But if you got a clean bed, that's not a bad way to go right now. But there's a few options you could take. The only problem is because we're getting so late, a lot of those nurse crops, they're not going to last very long. So it's just a matter of kind of where you're at, if you do have that clean bed or not, to determine if you actually want to try to plant now and or what you could plant as a nurse crop. I mean, guys down south, they still got plenty of time, and there's a lot of guys that are planting that, right now or the past couple of weeks, and that's fine if we run oats with it or something just to get something there. But yeah, I think up north here, you're almost better off trying to get one more Roundup application out and then plan on frost seeding that.
Yep. No, I agree. The guys down south, definitely have a little bit longer window to kind of get some of that done. So, talking about other screens, this is a great time to plant some Miscanthus, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially now I think we're finally to the point where we might start seeing some more consistent rains. At least that's kind of what it looks like across the board, and that's something that as soon as we can get out and get our perennials planted, all our Miscanthus or fruit trees. I know me and you had talked about guys planting Miscanthus around their blinds. It's not too late to hurry up, get out there and do that. And it's just a great time. I mean, we still got a lot of time for that, but for a lot of guys, they kind of want to get in, get that done, and then get back out and kind of let the wood sit for a little bit of time we do have left.
Yeah. Yeah. And for guys that don't know, Miscanthus is a perennial grass that comes up every year. And, by around, year 3, you could easily have, 10 to 12 foot Miscanthus as a screen, to hide your entry, access trails or blinds and whatnot. But for guys that want to, create a screen, they don't want to plant the sorghum or the switchgrass. How do you recommend guys plant that? I mean, you've got Miscanthus that's already up and out of the ground, and it's kind of ahead of what some guys are doing as far as just planting the rhizomes. But are you recommending going 2 rows, 3 rows staggered? What's your preferred method?
Yeah, and that's where, depending on what else they have going, if some guys still like to do the annual and do that for a few years while their Miscanthus is coming up, and that's a great option.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're doing that, I would look at 2 rows, just because you're not trying to count on that screen as soon as possible for that. If it's really wide open, then I do like to go 3, just because that way that's going to help stand a little longer into the winter if you got 3 rows, and it's going to fill in a lot faster. But we're looking at roughly 2 feet apart, and then that second row is 2 foot apart from the first row, and they're all staggered. And then that way, if the third row, if you're doing a third or even a fourth, you can keep that stagger alignment going and go another 2 feet. And that just seems to kind of be the best, because again, once you get to year 3 or 4, I mean, you do start to spread out, but it's not until you get to like 5 and 6 that those really get a foot or 2 wide as far as all those shoots coming out of the ground. So if you are going 2 or 3 rows wide with your plantings, that's just going to help to fill that in as a wall sooner than if you do go 2 rows.
Yeah. And so what are you recommending as far as fertilizer? What's a good fertilizer for Miscanthus?
That's where we'll take our Plot Doctor Dry and do a root dip with that, and probably one of the best, especially as you're just planting. And then for the guys that either A, if you're just planting it even now, or B, for the guys that have established Miscanthus, we'll go and I'll just have them kind of mix up a little bit extra as they're spraying their food plots when they're planting, or if you're doing a perennial maintenance program on any of your perennial plots, to just go over and, spray that row with that Plot Doctor as you're spraying everything else. And we'll go and we'll do that once or twice a year, depending on kind of the guy's program or the setup or whatever crops he's growing. But especially right now, that's kind of the same thing that we were talking about with the weeds, that if we can get a little bit of fertilizer on there now, that's just going to help to bring all that back down to the roots and store those carbohydrates. So that way next year it's going to come out in the spring even stronger.
Okay. Yeah. So Miscanthus rhizomes, what do you mean by doing a root dip?
So for the pots that guys have been picking up, the last few weeks from me, we'll literally take Plot Doctor Dry and mix 3 ounces of that per gallon of water in a 5-gallon bucket. And guys are even doing that with their spruce and their fruit trees right now, to where you're just pulling the tree or the Miscanthus out of the pot. You're dunking that whole thing in that 5-gallon bucket and then planting that. So not only are the roots taking that up directly, but now we're completely saturating that soil with a little bit of starter fertilizer. And that gives you a whole lot better success rate. And like I was saying, when it comes out in the spring, you're going to be that much stronger. So we can do that, or when the guys were spraying their plots and you're just kind of coming over and maybe you already have an established row, or even when you get done planting the whole row, even if you do the root dip, guys are using the foliar product, and we're just going through not only covering some of the leaves, but we're also spraying that whole root zone with Plot Doctor foliar. again, getting that carbon there and getting those nutrients there so they're not going to be tied up and letting those plants take that in.
Yeah. Okay. Shoot, that's great advice, man. I mean, because a lot of guys are just putting Miscanthus rhizome in the ground and maybe a little bit of a triple 12 or something like that, right? And calling it good. But yeah, I like that dipping process in that in the dry. That's awesome.
It's worked really well. And two, for a lot of guys that have the sandy soil, I've dealt with it myself with a few customers that we planted the rhizomes, but it was just so sandy that first summer it just they didn't take. So maybe they had a really bad success rate, or they had 0% success rate, and everything just died because it got dry and that sand just wasn't able to hold any moisture for them. That's where especially the pots are such a good idea, because you already have an established root system, whether it be miscanthus or even spruce, that we can do a whole lot better, because now your plant's going to be established and already acclimated by the time next summer and the droughts come next year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you're planting that in sand, it'd be worthwhile just to, dig a little bit bigger hole and maybe, dump a little peat moss in there as well,
Yeah, I mean, really anything to kind of raise that organic matter, have anything for moisture holding capacity. And also, I mean, doing that root dip as a starter to really help push some roots and get that thing, drive some roots down a little deeper and get acclimated. The faster the better there.
Yeah. So you had mentioned, planting grapevines around, box blinds and whatnot, and let those grapevines grow up, like especially around the tower blind, platforms and whatnot, the stands underneath the box blind, grapevines growing up that. So you said that you guys have already done that and you got grapevines growing up the stands, huh?
Yeah, we actually kind of came up with it because on one of our blinds, we had some creeper that just started growing up there and it just took over. And that's something I really didn't want to plant any more creeper, but I'll gladly go plant, some grapes. So we planted some grapes on a few of our other platforms, and sure enough, they're just growing right up those posts. And we were hoping that it was kind of going to overtake that to the point where hopefully down the road we'll have to open those windows and actually do some trimming. But where that creeper had taken over a couple of years ago, I mean, that blind is very well camoed. And even later into the season, even when the leaves fall off, at least you have all those vines there that kind of keep that covered up. So it's not like you have just this big blind sitting out in the middle of nowhere. I like to do it. I think it helps and gives you a little bit more help as far as concealing that, especially after the leaves fall.
Yeah. I think that's just a great idea. I mean, a lot of times I'll try and cover up some of these, box blinds that are on stilts, and, you try and cut conifer branches and, some oak trees, small ones, and, they hold their leaves quite well, or even beech trees, and you just try and, cram some of that stuff underneath the box blind inside the stand. Eventually, you're going to have to replace those all the time because they do deteriorate. But man, I love the grapevine idea. That's, I think that should work really well. Another purpose for a grapevine other than just a looking branch.
Absolutely. And that was because we had a bunch of actual, commercial varieties that we were planting basically for the deer. But obviously that's kind of nice. And you can walk out to your blind and grab a handful of grapes before you go into.
Yeah, exactly. So, any other last minute things that you wanted to cover before, let's see what we got, opening days in 9 days,
Yeah, it's coming. I think that was it. That was kind of the most of the questions that I've been getting and seeing on Facebook, kind of that last minute fertilizer apps, last minute herbicide apps, should I or not? And that's something I was having guys send me pictures. What weeds are we talking about? How bad is it? Is that something we really want to do right now or have to? And if we do, well, then let's make sure we're getting the weeds that we want and, trying to do a good job with that. But for those harder to kill weeds, it's a good time. But I think that was it. That kind of wraps up most of the questions that we had coming in.
Yeah.
And I think everyone's just gearing up, getting ready.
Yep. Well, I'm sure there's probably some other guys like myself. I created just a real little kill plot. I mean, that thing might be a 15th of an acre. I mean, really small, just a little kill plot right in the middle of some, thick bedding area. Great place to take a doe. Anyway, I tell you, I've struggled with that little plot. I've, did a soil test and had to throw, put a bunch of your stuff on there. But, when I planted, man, we just had like no rain for 3 weeks, and I went back out there and reseeded, and then it rained way too hard and the seed washed away. It was on a little bit of a slope, and I'm telling you, I had high hopes for this little ambush plot, but man, it's just been one thing after another. So I'm going to go out there one more time. I'm going to throw some more rye down yet. It's about the only thing. It's my last Hail Mary.
Yeah, I know. And that's what I got to hurry up, and I still got about 5 acres I want to throw some more rye on and at least get something else there. So I'm hoping to do that this week. And hopefully I can get out and do that before this rain. But that too, I mean, for the guys up north, we're kind of running close to that last application of rye. And I know guys down south have a little bit more time, but definitely not a bad time to hurry up and try to get out and finish everything up.
Yep. You bet. All right, Brad. Well, hey, we'll have to, continue these next year again, once we start getting into, probably March, and guys are starting to think about, doing some frost seeding and that type of thing. And I'm sure by then you're going to be shipping a lot of product out, I would imagine.
I would assume so. I know a lot of guys are already talking about, getting their order in for switchgrass for frost seeding. A lot of guys are already talking about ordering clovers for frost seeding. And that's always a great time to mix that Plot Doctor dry with your seed, just so that's there when it goes. And a lot of guys are putting in orders for their trees right now and kind of getting that figured out, as well as Miscanthus. The habitat work never really stops, which I don't mind that. That's a good thing.
Yep, you bet. And you've got a list of the different types of trees and other plants that you offer. You got that on your site, Brad?
Yes, that will be on the site. We're going to put up kind of like an order form now, to where you can pre-order whatever you want to pre-order, and be able to pick that up in the spring. And we're also going to have an option to where if you wanted to pre-order pots for next fall, but all the varieties of everything will be on there. And that should be on the site hopefully in about a week. Be able to get that on there and have guys look at that and see what they want, and at least get them thinking about next year.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, I'll put a link to your site right underneath this video in the description below. So anybody that wants to check that out to see, what do you offer besides fertilizer and that type of thing, will be able to just go and click on it and check it out. So.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome.
All right, Brad. Well, hey, it's been a interesting growing year for sure this year, for some guys more than others, but hopefully, like I was telling John the other day, I don't think we can have two years in a row with this horrible drought like we've had. I mean, it's just not been much fun for some guys.
No, and I think that normally how it goes with farming is you get those couple dry years, and then the next couple years you're wishing it would stop raining, and that's probably how it's going to go.
Yeah. All right, Brad. Well, hey, good luck out there in the with a bow in your hand this year, and yeah, we'll continue these podcasts again next year.
Awesome. That sounds good. Yeah. Thank you. You as well. We'll be in touch.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
All right. We'll see you.